They called us the silent service. But inside a fleet boat, it was never truly silent. There was the constant hum of the ventilation blowers, the rhythmic throb of the Fairbanks Morse diesel engines when we were on the surface, the creaking of the hull plates as we dove deep, and the smell. You cannot describe the smell of a World War II submarine to someone who wasn't there. It was a thick physical wall that hit you the moment you climbed down the hatch. It was a mixture of diesel fuel, battery acid, cooking grease, hydraulic fluid, stale cigarette smoke, and the sweat of 80 men who hadn't showered in 2 months. We called it the funk. It soaked into your skin. It soaked into your clothes. Even years after the war, my wife said she could still smell the diesel coming out of my pores when I sweat. We were the elite. Every man on a submarine was a volunteer. You had to pass rigorous psychological tests to prove you wouldn't crack under the pressure. Because down there at 300 feet, there is no place to run. If one man panics, everyone dies. The boat was 311 feet long, but it felt like a shoebox. Every inch of space was filled with valves, pipes, and machinery. We lived in the torpedo rooms. We slept on top of the torpedoes. We practiced hot bunking. 3 men shared 2 bunks. When one man got up to go on watch, another man, sweaty and greasy, climbed into his warm sheets. The bed never got cold. The heat was oppressive. In the Pacific, the water temperature was 85 degrees. Inside the boat, with the engines running and the ventilation shut down for a silent run, the temperature could hit 110, 120 degrees. We wore almost nothing. Cut-off shorts and sandals. We were constantly dripping wet. Mold grew on our shoes. Mold grew on our wallets. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the psychological weight. Once that hatch clanged shut and the wheel was spun to lock it, you were sealed in a steel pipe. You were cut off from the sun, the wind, the sky. You existed in a world of artificial light and recycled air. You knew that a depth charge could crack the hull like an eggshell. You knew that if you sank, it would be a slow, suffocating death in the dark. We didn't talk about it. We played poker. We read books until the covers fell off. We told dirty jokes. But in the back of every man's mind was the knowledge that we were patrolling inside an iron coffin, and we were hunting giants. The war for a submariner is 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. You spend weeks patrolling an empty ocean, staring at the horizon through binoculars until your eyes bleed. Then, a cry from the lookout. "Smoke on the horizon! Bearing 045! The captain rushes to the bridge. "Clear the bridge! Dive! Dive! Dive!" The klaxon screams. "Auga! Auga!" You slide down the ladder. The vents open with a roar of escaping air. The boat angles down. The world tilts. Now, the game begins. We are no longer a boat. We are a shark. The captain is on the periscope. He is the eyes of the ship. The rest of us are blind. We operate on trust. The plotting party goes to work. The executive officer stands over the TDC, the torpedo data computer. This was a mechanical brain, a masterpiece of analog gears and dials. It calculated the speed of the enemy, the angle on the bow, the speed of our torpedoes, and the gyro angle. Range, 2,000 yards. Speed, 12 knots. Angle on the bow, 30 port. We are hunting a Japanese convoy. Tankers, freighters, the lifeblood of the empire. If we sink them, the factories in Tokyo stop running. The tension in the conning tower is electric. Sweat drips off the captain's nose. Up periscope, the hydraulic piston hisses. Final bearing. Mark. Set. Fire 1. You feel the boat shudder as the 3,000-pound Mark 14 torpedo is ejected by compressed air. Fire 2. Fire 3. Then, the waiting. A torpedo run takes time. 30 seconds. A minute. The sonar man listens on his headphones. "Hot run, Captain. Fish are running true." Everyone in the control room holds their breath. We are counting the seconds in our heads. We wait for the boom. The earth-shattering explosion that tells us we killed the target. Thump. A dull metal clang, like a hammer hitting a wall. Then silence. No explosion. Thump. Another one. Damn it, the captain curses. Duds! They're duds! This was the tragedy of the early war. The Mark 14 torpedo was a piece of junk. It ran too deep. The magnetic exploder fired too early. And if you hit the target perfectly, at a 90-degree angle, the contact pin would crush instead of firing. We risked our lives to get into position. We fired perfect shots, and we heard our torpedoes bounce harmlessly off the hulls of the enemy ships. It was heartbreaking. It was infuriating. But we didn't have time to be angry, because the Japanese destroyers, the escorts, had seen the torpedo wakes. They knew where we were. They were turning towards us, and they were bringing the depth charges. The moment the torpedoes missed, the dynamic changed instantly. We went from being the hunter to the hunted. The Japanese destroyers turned towards us. We could hear their propellers through the hull, a fast, high-pitched thrum, thrum, thrum that grew louder with every second. The captain's voice dropped to a whisper. Rig for silent running. Dive to 300 feet. This was the ritual of survival. Every non-essential motor was shut off. The ventilation fans stopped. The air conditioning died. The temperature inside the boat spiked immediately. It went from 90 degrees to 110, then 120. The air grew heavy and stale. Condensation dripped from the overhead pipes like rain. We took off our shoes. We weren't allowed to walk. We weren't allowed to speak above a whisper. We weren't even allowed to drop a wrench. Because up there, 300 feet above us, they were listening. And then, we heard it. The sound every submariner hears in his nightmares. Ping. Active sonar. It sounded like pebbles being thrown against a metal bucket. It was high, sharp, and cold. Ping. Ping. It meant they had found us. The sound waves were bouncing off our steel hull, telling the destroyer captain exactly where to drop his hate. You don't move. You sit on the floor, hugging your knees, sweat pouring down your face, stinging your eyes. You look at the depth gauge. You look at the bolts on the hull. You pray. Then the screw noises stopped. That was the worst moment. When the destroyer passes directly overhead, he loses sonar contact. He can't hear you anymore, but he knows where you were. He is rolling the ash cans, the depth charges, off the stern. You wait. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, click. A sharp metallic crack. That's the detonator firing. And then, wham! The world turns upside down. It isn't a sound. It's a physical blow. The boat is lifted up and slammed down sideways. The lights go out. The emergency lanterns flicker on, casting eerie red shadows. Cork insulation flies off the walls like confetti. Dust fills the air. Glass dials shatter. Men are thrown out of their bunks. Then the next one hits. And the next. Wham, wham. The hull groans. It screams. You can hear the steel ribs compressing under the pressure of the explosion and the ocean. Leak in the forward torpedo room. Water sprays in at 600 pounds per square inch. It cuts like a knife. It sounds like a jet engine. If we can't stop the leak, the water will weigh us down. We will sink past our crushed depth, and the ocean will squeeze us until we implode. The damage control party rushes forward with mattresses and jacks to plug the hole. They work in the dark, slipping on the oily floor, screaming orders over the noise of the rushing water. The barrage can last for hours. Imagine sitting in a steel drum while a giant beats it with a sledgehammer. That is a depth charge attack. Your ears ring. Your nose bleeds from the pressure changes. You look at the man next to you. He is vomiting into a bucket. Another man is staring at his hands, shaking uncontrollably. You want to scream. You want to run. But there is nowhere to go. There is only the steel pipe and the dark water. The captain stands in the conning tower. He is the calmest man on the boat. He has to be. If he cracks, we all die. He orders evasive maneuvers. Right full rudder, all ahead flank. We twist and turn in the deep, trying to hide under thermal layers, cold patches of water that deflect sonar. We release Pillenwerfers, chemical bubble decoys that create a false sonar echo. We try to trick them. We try to disappear. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime, the explosions get further away. Boom, boom, distant thunder. The destroyer has lost us. Or maybe he ran out of depth charges. We stay silent. We don't celebrate. We don't move. We wait for hours, just drifting, making sure he is really gone. The air in the boat is foul. The CO2 levels are rising. We have headaches. We are gasping for breath like fish out of water. Finally, the captain gives the order. Periscope depth. We angle up. The boat shudders as it rises. The captain raises the scope. He looks around. Clear horizon. Surface, surface, surface. The ballast tanks blow. The boat breaches the surface foam like a whale. The hatch pops open. Fresh air. Sweet, cool, salty ocean air rushes down the hatch. We climb up to the bridge. We look at the stars. We are alive. We light cigarettes with shaking hands. We look at the oil slicks on the water. We survived the hammer of God, but we know with absolute certainty that tomorrow we have to go back down. By 1944, the war had changed. We had fixed the torpedoes. We had new radars. And we had a new strategy. We stopped hiding. The Japanese convoys were hugging the coastlines, moving at night in shallow water where we couldn't dive. So, we decided to fight them on their own turf, on the surface. It was a tactic that went against everything we learned in school. A submarine on the surface is a sitting duck. It has no armor. One shell from a destroyer can sink it. But we had an ace in the hole, the SJ radar. It allowed us to see in the dark. We could spot a Japanese convoy 20,000 yards away in pitch blackness. We could plot their course, speed, and zigzags without ever seeing them with our eyes. We became surface raiders. We would race ahead of the convoy, wait for the moon to go down, and then charge in. It was like a knife fight in a closet. We would penetrate right into the middle of the convoy formation. Destroyers on the left, tankers on the right. Clear the bridge! Man the deck guns! The gun boss would scramble up the ladder with his crew. They would unstrap the 4-inch or 5-inch deck gun. The target was often a sampan or a small freighter not worth a torpedo. The order was, battle surface. The boat would rock as the diesel engines roared to flank speed. Range, 800 yards. Fire, boom. The muzzle flash would blind you for a second. Then you'd see the shell hit the enemy ship. Wood splinters flying. Cargo exploding. It was chaotic. Japanese machine guns would open up on us. Bullets would clang off the conning tower. We fired back with everything we had. 20mm Oerlikon cannons, 50 caliber machine guns, even Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. We were fighting a naval battle at pistol range. The smell of cordite mixed with the salt spray. The deck was slippery with spent shell casings. I remember one night in the Yellow Sea. We engaged a Japanese armed trawler. It was a duel. We circled each other, firing point blank. Their shells punched holes in our fair water. Our shells ripped their wheelhouse apart. Finally, they caught fire. We watched them sink, the crew jumping into the black water. We didn't stop to pick them up. We couldn't. There were other ships to hunt. Surface action was an adrenaline rush like no other. It was piracy. It was reckless. And it was terrifyingly effective. By 1944, the war had changed. We had fixed the torpedoes. We had new radars. And we had a new strategy. We stopped hiding. The Japanese convoys were hugging the coastlines, moving at night in shallow water where we couldn't dive. So, we decided to fight them on their own turf, on the surface. It was a tactic that went against everything we learned in school. A submarine on the surface is a sitting duck. It has no armor. One shell from a destroyer can sink it. But we had an ace in the hole, the SJ radar. It allowed us to see in the dark. We could spot a Japanese convoy 20,000 yards away in pitch blackness. We could plot their course, speed, and zigzags without ever seeing them with our eyes. We became surface raiders. We would race ahead of the convoy, wait for the moon to go down, and then charge in. It was like a knife fight in a closet. We would penetrate right into the middle of the convoy formation. Destroyers on the left, tankers on the right. Clear the bridge! Man the deck guns! The gun boss would scramble up the ladder with his crew. They would unstrap the 4-inch or 5-inch deck gun. The target was often a sampan or a small freighter not worth a torpedo. The order was, battle surface. The boat would rock as the diesel engines roared to flank speed. Range, 800 yards, fire! Boom! The muzzle flash would blind you for a second. Then you'd see the shell hit the enemy ship, wood splinters flying, cargo exploding. It was chaotic. Japanese machine guns would open up on us. Bullets would clang off the conning tower. We fired back with everything we had.
Now. Just drink your coffee.
20mm Oerlikon cannons, 50 caliber machine guns, even Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. We were fighting a naval battle at pistol range. The smell of cordite mixed with the salt spray. The deck was slippery with spent shell casings. I remember one night in the Yellow Sea. We engaged a Japanese armed trawler. It was a duel. We circled each other, firing point blank. Their shells punched holes in our fair water. Our shells ripped their wheelhouse apart. Finally, they caught fire. We watched them sink, the crew jumping into the black water. We didn't stop to pick them up. We couldn't. There were other ships to hunt. Surface action was an adrenaline rush like no other. It was piracy. It was reckless. And it was terrifyingly effective. But there was one mission that terrified a submarine captain more than attacking a battleship. Lifeguard duty. As the air war moved closer to Japan, hundreds of American pilots were being shot down over the ocean. If they landed in the water, they were doomed. The Japanese would strafe them in their parachutes or capture them for torture. So, the Navy ordered the submarines to stop hunting and start waiting. We would park ourselves a few miles off the coast of an enemy island. We were a stationary target. We had to stay on the surface, exposed, watching the sky. It was agonizing. You felt naked. You watched the airstrikes going in. You saw the flak bursting in the sky. Then, the radio call, "Mayday! Mayday! I'm punching out." You'd see a parachute blossom. Right full rudder. All ahead, flank. The submarine would surge forward, racing the Japanese patrol boats to the downed pilot. It was a race for life. If we got there first, we saved an American boy. If they got there first, he was dead. The most famous rescue happened on September 2nd, 1944. The submarine was the USS Finback. The pilot was a skinny 20-year-old kid named George. He was flying an Avenger torpedo bomber. He had been hit by anti-aircraft fire over Chichijima. His plane was burning. He dropped his bombs on the target and then bailed out over the water. His 2 crewmen didn't make it out. George was floating in a tiny yellow rubber raft, bleeding from a head wound miles from safety. Japanese boats were already launching from the island to get him. The Finback surfaced right in front of him. To George, that gray steel hull rising out of the ocean must have looked like the hand of God. The sailors ran out on deck with Tommy guns to cover the rescue. They threw him a line. "Welcome aboard, sir." They pulled him up. He was shaking, vomiting seawater, crying for his lost crew. That skinny kid was Lieutenant George H.W. Bush, future President of the United States. If the Finback hadn't been there, history would have been very different. We rescued hundreds of aviators like him. We called them Zoomies. They were funny. They hated the submarine. They couldn't stand the smell, the heat, the claustrophobia. They said, "I'd rather crash in a plane than dive in this sewer pipe." But when they climbed out of that hatch in Pearl Harbor, alive, holding a beer, they looked at us with a gratitude that words couldn't express. Lifeguard duty cost us boats. We lost the USS Tang, the USS Harder, and others while they were trying to save pilots. But it was worth it. It proved that in the U.S. Navy, no one is left behind. Not even in the middle of the enemy's ocean. By late 1944, the U.S. Navy had strangled the empire of Japan. The shipping lanes were empty. The factories were silent. The oil tankers were burning on the bottom of the Pacific. Leading this slaughter was one boat, the USS Tang, and one man, Commander Richard O'Kane. O'Kane was the ace of aces. He didn't just sink ships. He hunted them with a cold, mathematical precision. He would take the Tang right into the middle of a Japanese convoy, surfacing at night, firing torpedoes from both the bow and the stern, spinning the boat like a top. On her fifth patrol, in the Formosa Strait, the Tang was unstoppable. She sank freighters, transports, and tankers. She emptied her racks. On the night of October 24, 1944, O'Kane had 2 torpedoes left. He spotted a crippled transport ship, a sitting duck. He maneuvered the Tang for the coup de grace. Fire 23! The torpedo shot out of the tube. It ran true. Then, O'Kane ordered the final shot. Fire 24! The last torpedo left the tube, but something was wrong. On the bridge, O'Kane watched in horror. The torpedo broached. It jumped out of the water. Then it turned sharply to the left. It began to circle. Emergency speed! All ahead flank! Right full rudder! O'Kane screamed. But it was too late. The torpedo had locked its rudder. It was completing a perfect circle. It was coming back. 20 seconds later, the Mark 18 electric torpedo slammed into the stern of the Tang. Boom! The explosion broke the back of the submarine. The stern sank instantly. The bow pointed up at the sky, then slid backward under the waves. O'Kane and 8 men on the bridge were thrown into the water. But the true horror was happening inside. 30 men were trapped in the forward torpedo room. The boat settled on the bottom, 180 feet down. They were alive. The lights were out. The air was getting thin. They had one chance. The Momsen lung, an early rebreather device. They had to flood the compartment to equalize the pressure, open the escape trunk, and swim up 180 feet to the surface. It was a nightmare scenario. Most men panicked. The heat from an electrical fire was baking them. The carbon dioxide was putting them to sleep. Only a handful made it out. They ascended slowly, lungs bursting, terrified of the bends. When they broke the surface, they found O'Kane treading water. Of the 87 men on board, only 9 survived, including O'Kane. They were picked up by a Japanese frigate. They were beaten, tortured, and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. The Tang had sunk herself. It was a tragic, ironic end to the most successful submarine in U.S. history. It proved that in this war, even your own weapons could turn against you. When the war ended in 1945, the atomic bombs got the headlines. The Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima got the photos. But the war had been won long before, largely by the silent service. The U.S. submarines had destroyed the Japanese merchant marine. They had sunk 55% of all Japanese ships lost in the war. They had starved the island nation of oil, rubber, and food. Without the submarines, the war might have dragged on for years, but the cost was staggering. 52 submarines never came back. 3,506 submariners are still on eternal patrol. That is a casualty rate of 22%, the highest of any branch of the U.S. military in World War II. Being a submariner meant accepting a unique kind of death. No grave, no marker, just the crushing depth of the ocean. We call it eternal patrol. We don't say they died. We say they are still out there. Every year at submarine bases, we read the list. USS Albacore, USS Bonefish, USS Wahoo. We ring a bell for each boat. To the men who served, the submarine wasn't just a machine. It was a living thing. It was their home, their weapon, and eventually, for many, their tomb. We lived in a world of pressure and silence. We fought a war where the enemy was often just a sound in a headphone or a shadow in a periscope. We were the only branch that could go anywhere, anytime, unseen. And when we came home, we carried the silence with us. We didn't talk about the depth charges. We didn't talk about the smell of the dead boats we sank. We didn't talk about the friends we left at the bottom of the Pacific. We just looked at the ocean a little differently than everyone else, because we knew what was down there. This concludes our series on submarine warfare in World War II. It is a story of technology, claustrophobia, and the incredible courage of men who volunteered to fight inside an iron coffin. Thank you for diving deep with us on Beneath the Metal. Please subscribe, share, and remember the 52 boats still on patrol. Dive, dive,